What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA strategy show. Dave Loughran joining me as always every Tuesday morning, Adam Scherer, and we've got, well, for the first time in a while, we've actually got a new basketball game to talk about, not a recycled one that went for 7 games. So I'm pretty excited about it. And we've got a game 7 between the very surprising Denver Nuggets and the ultra disappointing Doc Rivers-led LA Clippers. I've been seeing many tweets, Adam, over the past couple of days calling for Doc Rivers' head. He's not equipped to coach this team. Anything he's ever won was by no reason of his own. Twitter gets intense, but I will say this much. This is definitely a spot where nobody expected Denver to be heading into this series.
Yeah, it gives us one more unexpected 2-game slate. But yeah, seeing the same Doc Rivers tweets, obviously, that you're talking about. I saw someone retweet one of his own tweets from like 5 years ago saying how Doc Rivers can't close it out in the playoffs with like multiple examples. And he was like, this is from 5 years ago and it's still happening. So yeah, obviously not a game that we expected to get.
Nothing changes if nothing changes. But yeah, we've got 2 games. We're happy to have you guys with us. Like you said, kind of surprising. No one expected this to be the case, that we'd actually have a 2-game slate. This will be the last one of the year. This is your final 2-game slate. And you've got some huge contests popping off to $100,000 to first on DraftKings, $500,000 shoot around, and the $500,000 clutch shot, $100,000 to first on FanDuel. So look, they're not playing around. We're going to keep putting big money. They're going to keep putting big money out there. We're going to keep doing shows. And that's just the way it is. So what do you say we dive into this, man, with the first one, Miami-Boston?
Yeah, let's go.
So I don't see any reason to believe that this game shoots out and that you actually see a high total. Now, can it soar above 210? It's possible. But both of these teams, fantastic defensively. We saw Miami Heat stymie the Milwaukee Bucks with and without Giannis Antetokounmpo on the court. There's a 210 total. The Bucks or the Celtics are actually laying 2 points. So they're favored by 2 points. You mentioned to me before the show, you think this series goes to 7, which in all fairness makes a lot of sense. But both of these teams have gotten to where they are for similar but unique reasons, in that Miami did an excellent job of keeping Giannis out of the paint. They made it really troublesome, forcing him to take threes, forcing Milwaukee into really bad offensive sets. And then they just had them running around, scrambling defensively, not being able to get set. It they paid their price, man. They took them out in 5 games. And then the other hand, Boston has the #1 defensive rating in the postseason through the first 2 series. It's going to be an interesting series. There's no doubt about that. These teams have many differences, but a ton of similarities as well.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I do expect it to be I don't want to say struggle offensively, because obviously both of these teams do have some really good offensive players, but just a lower scoring game in general. You know, I'm not expecting this to be one where you're just running up and down the floor getting buckets, because both of these teams are really, really solid defensively, both as a team and as far as individual defenders go.
So let's kick it off with the Miami Heat. We do have ownership. We do have projections. The boom bust tool is up at awesemo.com. So if you want to follow along with us, we can do that as well. The highest owned Miami player right now, and let me actually update this to see if we've gotten an update in the past few minutes. I don't believe we have. No, we haven't. So are you seeing ownership for this game?
Trying to pull it up now, and no.
Okay. So we should be getting this soon. Right. This is the last one. So we do have projections. We do have the boom or bust tool. We don't have ownership yet. So I'll hit Alex up and see what we can get there, because it's going to be really interesting to see how much ownership goes to this game and how much goes to this late game between Denver and the Clippers, which actually has a lower total, by the way, 207.5 in the late night hammer, where a 7.5 point spread. But we'll kick it off with Jimmy Butler coming in at $8,500 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, shooting guard eligibility, he's $8,000. He's done a phenomenal job defensively, and Butler, in typical Jimmy Butler fashion, has put up some solid statistical games, but he's also been quiet in a few of them because that's just who he is. He's not the statistical monster that people want him to be. From time to time, he's going to have those games, Adam. But look, Jimmy Butler's an all-around solid player that seems to come alive in the postseason, and that's exactly what he does. It doesn't mean he's going to go for 30, 10, and 8 every game, though.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with him is that he obviously gives you that really high ceiling in DFS because he's capable of taking over any one individual game, but he doesn't have to still be a factor on the floor. He does so many things well. He gets other guys involved and defend. And there's enough other pieces on this team that can score, whether you're talking about Dragic or Hero or Bam, that you can't rely on Butler to be the monster usage guy every single game like you can with some other, with a lot of best players basically in the playoffs. But his salary is still reasonable as well. You don't get that 10K price tag on Butler that you do on the best player on a lot of other teams. And so he's still a good play, I think. Obviously only a 2-game slate, only so many guys to go to. You expect around 37 minutes from him. Usage rate should be in the mid-20s. Assist percentage should be in the mid-20s. So I think he looks like a pretty solid option, but probably not like the first guy I'm getting into my lineups. More so of, whatever I do get to, I'm happy though.
I want to ask you about Duncan Robinson. We'll work our way through all of these. We will leave no stone unturned on a 2-game slate. You know that. You're talking about somebody who is an absolute sharpshooter, but hasn't really been. They haven't really required his services in many instances with some of these games, right? 1 for 4 shooting in game 1, 4 for 9, 2 for 8, 7 for 13. Played only 14 minutes in game 5, in which they won, and shot 1 for 3 in that game with 2 points and a board, 4 personal fouls. Does Duncan Robinson, is his price on a night where you're likely going to need some firepower from beyond the arc, which is how Miami got here to begin with? Does Duncan Robinson warrant any attention here at 4,500?
Yes. It's not with a lot of confidence, but through 9 games in the playoffs so far, he's averaged 26 minutes per game. We've seen a lot of games where he doesn't play at all in the fourth quarter. And then we saw like that one game basically where he still didn't really play in the fourth quarter, I don't think, but he played like 39 minutes through the first 3 quarters. The thing that concerns me about him, I mean, obviously the lack of playing time, but with regard to the lack of playing time, you mentioned needing his 3-point shooting and his offensive firepower. His direct backup has been Tyler Hero. So it's not like they're using Andre Iguodala behind him and they're sacrificing offensively. They've just kind of made it clear that they want Tyler Hero out there closing games. Hero's played really well throughout the playoffs. I'm going to have trouble trusting Duncan Robinson until the rotation changes and someone other than Tyler Hero is the one taking his minutes.
No, it's a great point. Tyler Hero getting a lot of run too. And, overall, Tyler Hero supplanting him has been pretty successful, as you mentioned. He's not getting up a ton of shots, but interestingly enough, he's attempted double-digit field goal attempts now in 8 straight games. Does that transfer over into this series where if Hero gets look at his minutes, 32, 31, 33, 37 over the final 4 games of that last series with the Bucks? Does Tyler Hero have an opportunity here to put up decent numbers? Or do we stay away from him? By the way, Alex did just update ownership, so I'll take a look at that while you answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he does. Obviously he's not the first or second option on this team, especially in the playoffs, but he's still going to get opportunities. And most importantly, he's still affordable. He's $5,400, which makes him cheaper than on DraftKings. He's cheaper than every Miami regular, like real rotation player, with the exception of Duncan Robinson. He's cheaper than Jay Crowder. He's obviously cheaper than Butler, Bam, and Dragic. So the salary is really affordable for someone that you're expecting to play around 32 minutes, if not more. His playing time, we saw this rotation going back to the Indiana series as well. So it's not like it was just a matchup, last series. It's just that's what Spoelstra's been doing. So I feel relatively confident in Hero's minutes. The price point's cheap. Usage rate is probably going to be around 21%. So for him to really have a big game, obviously you're going to need him to be efficient because he's probably not getting a ton of shots up and he doesn't contribute a whole lot in the way of peripherals. But just from a playing time and salary standpoint, I'm definitely interested in Hero.
Bam Adebayo getting the most ownership for this Miami team. You actually have to come a little bit down at probably 10th highest owned player on the slate. It might be 11th, around 29%. He's had a strong series, a strong postseason. He's shooting 67% from within 3 feet of the basket. That is his wheelhouse. It's exactly what you would expect him to do. And he's been on a per minute basis, a solid enough player for us to consider him. We have to really factor pricing into all of this. And another thing too is the positional eligibility. We're going to talk about Jokic momentarily, but Bam Adebayo is power forward eligible on FanDuel. And it's basically Jason Tatum at 9,800, Adebayo at 8,500, and then Daniel Tice at 56, Michael Porter at 52. So there's a huge gap there from Tatum to Bam, and then an even larger gap from Bam to Daniel Tice. By the way, both starting centers, both listed at power forward on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think that Bam probably is a little bit more appealing on FanDuel because of the position. You could make the counter argument that paying down for Tice and Porter just opens up a bunch of salary. But with the power forward position being relatively weak and you have to roster 2 of them, it makes Bam a little bit more useful. DraftKings, I think he's fine as well. The problem is just that you have him competing not only with Daniel Tice at a cheaper price point, with Jokic at the top, with Zubac at a cheaper price point. So I think it'll be a little bit easier to get to him on FanDuel, but a pretty solid site, or a pretty solid play on either site. You know, you mentioned the production in the playoffs. His per minute production is down slightly, but still very good. He's averaged 1.16 DraftKings points per minute so far in the postseason, 1.21 DraftKings points per minute in the regular season this year. He's a nice play for DFS just in general, because he contributes so much in so many different areas. Like if Boston does a good job of keeping him from scoring, he still has a good chance of picking up assists, picking up rebounds, and giving you a decent total. If Boston, limits the rebounds, there's a good chance that he's still getting points and all that. So he's not one-dimensional, which is really nice. The playing time should be there. Coming off of their last game against Milwaukee, he only played about 30 minutes, but typically you're going to get 35 to 37 minutes from him. So I think that he's similar to Jimmy Butler as far as the price point. I think is where it should be on DraftKings at 8,400. So he's not looking like a great value, but he's not really looking overpriced either.
It's pretty remarkable how versatile he is. You talked about him not being one-dimensional. Well, it couldn't be any more evident than looking in the postseason. He's averaging 17.3 rebound chances per game, which alone is really solid for someone. It's not solid if you're Rudy Gobert, because he doesn't do a whole lot else. But Bam leads the team in potential assists in the playoffs with 10 per game. So he leads the team in potential assists. He leads the Miami Heat in rebounding opportunities. And even in the touches per game, Adam, you got Dragic at 76, Bam's at 69. So you're seeing him take on a far more versatile role. He's actually serving as a playmaker at times. And now, I obviously don't want to compare him to some of the great centers out there, like the Jokic's and stuff, that can do everything and contribute in every category. But as a matter of fact, on a lesser scale, that's actually what we've seen him do.
Yeah. And one last thing, and I kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but also kind of could matter. You could see a little bit more playing time for Bam in this series than you got against Milwaukee, just because there's so many different offensive pieces on Boston that Bam could be used to defend, because we've seen Spoelstra use him, on ball plenty. He's a really good just all-around defender, but Brad Stevens is going to play his good players so many minutes, whereas Bud was playing his, 32 to 36. You could see an extra minute or two on average for Bam, just as a result of Boston actually having the players that Spoelstra wants him to defend on the floor for more of the game.
Caress that like button. Show it some love. It helps us greatly. Just make sure it turns blue. We appreciate your support here. Helps us continue to get this show out to more viewers, so we can keep doing free content. So if you haven't done so yet, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you always know when new content's dropping next. We got shows for days, every sport. We've got something for you, from MMA to PGA to basketball, football, baseball, and I'm sure a whole lot more that I don't even know about. Okay, the rest of Miami, let's kind of cruise through this, Adam. We hit on Bam. We hit on Butler. We hit on Robinson. We hit on Tyler Hero. Next up on the list, Goran Dragic. He has been integral in this team having significant success and getting through the first 2 rounds in the postseason. He's dealt with myriad injuries over the past couple of seasons, but now you're seeing Goran Dragic play more minutes than he has in a long. I mean, when's the last time you remember Dragic getting 40 minutes in a game? Like, this is very uncharacteristic, especially under Eric Spoelstra, but I love it. And he's playing pretty well. On a per minute basis, it's not like he's crushing it, but you didn't need him to be crushing it until his price began to rise along with those minutes in the production. And now you've seen him go from 4,400 in the first game of the Indiana series to 59 in the second game to 7,300 now as we start this Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, and I think that's really where he should be priced. It's not a great value because he does still, like you said, he produces at a good rate, but it's not like he's coming in with 1.15 points per minute or something. He's at 1.05 DraftKings points per minute for the postseason, 27.3% usage rate through Miami's first 9 games. So that's really good. And I think he's priced where he should be. If he were any cheaper, he would start looking like a really, really good value. Where he is, you do at least need him to have a good game. It's not like he can kind of just walk into a good score here, but so it just makes him another kind of, I guess, secondary option where I'm perfectly happy with any lineup I look at that has Goran Dragic. He's just not like the first guy getting into my lineups. I think that in general, Miami's pretty priced, pretty efficiently. But his usage rate has been close to, if not higher than Butler's for the postseason. Butler at 25.6%. So yeah, Dragic has the higher usage rate out of the two so far throughout the playoffs.
Anybody else from Miami that stands out to you? I want to make sure we get to everybody here. As far as minutes go, like you're not seeing a ton from a number of guys that were getting a lot of opportunity early in the year. Kendrick Nunn is as an example, someone that was starting games in that backcourt for the large majority of the season. He's taken a backseat role here, and I think for good reason. Andre Iguodala's minutes have been a little bit erratic, but you're not getting really upwards of 20 in any spot. Is there anyone else that we can hit on here that is viable? I guess we can start with Jay Crowder, knowing that he is playing a consistent 30 minutes per game, and on a per minute basis, he's been floating right around that 1 fantasy point per minute over his last 4 in that series.
Yeah, his playing time has been there. The problem, I think, is just that the salaries increased pretty quickly. He's $5,800 on DraftKings, which makes him $400 more expensive than Tyler Hero. If you can get him at a cheaper price tag on a different site, then fine. Like, I do think the minutes will be there for him. It's just that he's not a great, per minute producer. The one other thing I would point out with Miami is that with it being a 2-game slate, obviously there's not a ton of good cheap value that you can count on. If you're playing large field tournaments, especially if you're playing a bunch of lineups, take some shots at Kelly Olynyk or Kendrick Nunn. I wouldn't do it together, but we've seen the minutes for both of those guys really vary game by game in Miami's last series. Obviously, we don't know exactly what they're going to do rotation-wise against Boston, but these guys are both so cheap. Olynyk's coming off of a 17-minute game. He's $3,500 on DraftKings. Kendrick Nunn's coming off of a 21-minute game at $3,200, or basically 22-minute game at the end. He's $3,200. If, these guys could both play 8 minutes tonight, but if they replicate that 17 and 22 minutes or come close to it, they're probably going to be good values at those salaries. So I think they're the kind of guys that in those larger field tournaments, you should be taking some shots at, just basically hoping that things break your way.
So here's what I wanted to ask you: what do you envision Spoelstra doing anything different in a series like this? Normally, you think there's only so many adjustments he can make, but whereas with Milwaukee, the primary focus was slowing down and containing Giannis, and then to a lesser extent, but still significantly, Chris Middleton. Eric Bledsoe was pretty quiet. In a game like this, you've got someone, or a series like this, you have somebody like Kemba Walker who finally looks healthy. He's breaking ankles again, coming up right to the top of the key and just burning opponents up. He's had some really fantastic games, but he's also looked really bad at times. Fact being is that he's going to play a lot of minutes, and he's going to probably get up a decent amount of shots here against the backcourt where Jimmy Butler, his defensive prowess is elite. There's no question. But you've got Jason Tatum to defend. You've got Jaylen Brown, who has been significantly better than I think anyone would have anticipated coming into the postseason, averaging 26 points over his last three. And then you've got Kemba Walker. So are the Miami Heat defensively equipped for this? Do they just play the zone so they don't necessarily have to worry about a single player? That might be the best move here, given the amount of weapons that Boston has in this starting five.
Yeah, I mean, the only spot where I would expect there to potentially be adjustments to the rotation would be with the backup guys. You know, whether Spoelstra likes the matchup for Olynyk and plays him more, or gives Kendrick Nunn more run. But I don't really feel confident like predicting that here, because for one, I never feel confident guessing what Spoelstra is going to do. But also, Miami's just had so many moving parts this year that it's really difficult. You know, a lot of times you can kind of go back and look at previous matchups and say like, oh, I think this guy, I think Spoelstra likes this guy because, you know, X, Y, Z. But Miami's had so many injuries and so many guys in and out of the lineup this year that it's really difficult to do. Like, if you go back and look at previous games against Miami, for example, Olynyk played 32 minutes against Boston August 4th. So in the bubble, pull up the game, and he started alongside Bam. So completely different than what we're getting right now. If you go back to the matchup prior to that, back in January, you had like Myers Leonard still in the lineup. So it's really, really difficult to say with any sort of confidence what I think is going to happen. I think that Olynyk certainly could get, you know, his 18 to 20 minutes here. He has played good minutes against them in the past. If you look over the last two seasons, he's played 5 games with Bam active. He's played 5 minutes, 40, 29, 28, and 32. Obviously, like I said, you can't read into those specific numbers because like he was starting some of those games, for example, but he was at least getting run. And so it's not like it's a matchup where Spoelstra doesn't want him out there.
So I wasn't surprised to see some pretty sloppy performances in Game 7. I don't think anybody was, between Boston and Toronto. That game ended up finishing 92-87. And one of the reasons, I believe, despite it being inside the bubble without travel and having one day off, Boston went into that after almost all of their starters played 50-plus minutes. Same with Toronto. Fortunately, unlike the Denver Nuggets heading into the Clippers series, Adam, the Boston Celtics have actually had a little bit of time to regroup here, where Denver got thrown right into the fire, 1 day of rest, then facing a Clippers team that had already been rested. The Boston Celtics haven't played since the 11th, but I will point out that they played a 7-game series. Miami played a 5, so they're a little bit more rested. Gordon Hayward is expected to return at some point in this series, but he will be inactive today. Another time we're talking about Boston Celtics, where it's just, all right, hey, you get a lot of similar production from most of these guys. You get a decent amount of closely priced players outside of Tatum, who's kind of pulled away from the pack now. And then a guy in Daniel Tice, who, assuming he stays out of foul trouble, fouled out last game, 23 minutes, and got in foul trouble a couple of other times in this series. Outside of that, he's probably going to get you 30 minutes again, unless Brad Stevens decides to change things up. And I don't know if this would be the best series to do that. So feel free to start wherever you want.
So the first thing that's really interesting to me with Boston, you know, you mentioned that obviously there's so many different guys on this team that can be the number one producer in any given game. They're normally difficult to rely on. One thing that I'm going to be really interested to see is Kemba Walker here. I think gives early in the series, I think he gives us an opportunity for a pretty big bounce back spot. Nick Nurse was pretty set on making Kemba not be the guy that beat Toronto. You saw a lot of like box and one defensively and just weird defensive schemes from Nurse basically to limit Kemba.
And he missed, by the way, he missed quite a bit of open shots as well.
Yeah, but he finished that series with a 20% usage rate.
Yeah, it's crazy.
For comparison,
and they can do that though too. They can do that because they have so many other there's so many other weapons. But you're right. Normally, you wouldn't want Kemba sporting a 20% usage rate in the conference semifinals.
Well, and also I just don't know that Miami takes that approach. Like, I think they would rather spend their time limiting Tatum probably than Kemba.
Yeah, I don't know if they would have felt that way coming into the postseason, but judging from what we've seen thus far, I don't think there's any doubt that Tatum is the Tatum is the primary weapon. I tweeted the other day, this guy's basically a superstar now. Like he's fantastic on both sides of the floor. And quite frankly, he's a little bit more versatile than Kemba Walker and what he can do with the basketball. But no, I think you're right. But it does feel like in terms of matchups here, and granted, basketball is a lot different than it was even a few years ago. Kemba Walker might have the easiest path or the path of least resistance in this spot against Miami.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the matchup does still scare me because Miami's so good defensively. But basically what I'm getting to is that Kemba's salary hasn't really gone up. He's 7,700 on DraftKings, and he had such a not great series from a DFS standpoint against Toronto that didn't really move. Like he's $300 less expensive than Brown now. He's 2K less than Jason Tatum. He's only 800 more than Marcus Smart. In games he's played this year without Gordon Hayward and with Tatum and with Brown, he has a 27.7% usage rate. And you compare that to the 20% he had against Toronto, there's clearly room for him to just be so much better and to really just destroy this price tag, especially when you factor in how many more minutes he's playing. I still don't love the matchup. Like if you look in the playoffs so far, Miami's been the most efficient team defending the pick and roll. They're not giving up many pick and roll possessions per game. If you go back to the regular season, they allowed the 6th fewest pick and roll possessions per game. So it's still, the matchup concerns me. It's just that based on the minutes Kemba was playing in the series against Toronto, if he had his normal usage and had a normal series, he'd be like 8,500 to 9K now. But because he didn't, his salary is still pretty cheap. And now you get a new opponent that until I see it happen, I'm going to assume their game plan isn't let Jason Tatum beat us instead of Kemba. So I think that you see the usage get back towards normal for Kemba, and it just makes him really underpriced here.
Where else are you looking to on Boston?
Tatum, obviously, I think that, like I said, Miami probably does what they can to try and limit him. But like you said, he's just really, really good now. Plays huge minutes, does everything well. So, his price tag obviously is expensive. He's up there competing with Kawhi and Jokic in terms of salary. But any Tatum I can get to, I'm going to be really happy about. Brown and Smart kind of look like Jimmy Butler to me relative to their salaries, just kind of priced where they should be. If I get to them, that's fine, but I'm not going to be super excited about it. Smart potentially could drop off a little bit. He's someone that did see more usage than normal in the Toronto series, but I'm not convinced that drops off because he's just kind of the guy, out of Tatum, Kemba, Brown, and Smart. Smart's the guy that teams are going to say, like, okay, you can get your shots. Like, we want you shooting it instead of these other guys. So I wouldn't be surprised if, again, you see Smart's usage percentage in this series higher than his regular season average. His price tag has come up to account for that, though. So Kemba looks like the one guy that really stands out to me, followed by Tatum just because he's Tatum. Brown, Smart, and Tice, I think, all pretty much priced where they should be.
This is by far the toughest spot for Miami in the postseason. You would have thought Milwaukee, but one of the biggest differences, Adam, looking at what Boston has done and how well they can produce from pretty much anywhere on the floor, is if you were to neutralize Giannis, just not even neutralize him, just mitigate the damage and slow down Middleton. I know it's a lot, but Middleton shot really poorly in a bunch of those games. Eric Bledsoe in many spots was non-existent, and the role players just weren't knocking down threes. I don't think Miami has the same luxury of focusing on one or two players, right? You have Kemba, you have Tatum, you have Brown. You don't have Hayward, but if you had Hayward, that would be even more significant. Right? This is a spot where if Boston plays as well as they did against Toronto and against the Sixers, it's going to be a lot more difficult for Miami to cover the same defensive ground as they did even against the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, no question, because you just have so many different guys that can be the number one guy for Boston. And, whereas Milwaukee, obviously, like if you just think about it, you take Giannis out. Milwaukee's like a fringe playoff team. You have Middleton leading the team. You have Bledsoe, but like they're not.
Middleton.
What did you say?
I said just stop Chris Middleton.
Right, yeah, exactly. Whereas Boston, they're obviously not as good, but you take out Tatum, they're still a really good team. You take out Kemba, they're still a really good team. It's just a deeper team. Like they obviously, like when you compare them to Milwaukee has the best player out of the group, but then probably, and then Middleton's in there, but like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth best players are probably like all from Boston.
And they'll force you into so many mistakes, particularly in the half court where you just have dogs on defense. Like Marcus Smart, my God, this dude will make your life miserable. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. You can hide Kemba Walker's inadequacies defensively because everyone else, including Daniel Tice, who has matured so much this season defensively, like the only I'd say Kemba is still a weakness defensively, but it almost doesn't matter because they have four other guys that can play elite defense for 48 minutes.
Yeah, no question. And I guess also one other thing to look at from a DFS standpoint here, Robert Williams' minutes came back in the final game against Toronto, played 17 and a half minutes. He's still 3,400 on DraftKings. You have to know that his floor is basically non-existent. We've seen Brad Stevens game to game go from 18 minutes to 8 minutes to 18 minutes with Williams. My assumption is going to be that it's around 16 minutes, but obviously you've seen games where those minutes go to Wanamaker and they run smaller lineups. So you're not going to be very confident. But again, just cheap enough where you should be taking shots at him in large field tournaments because of the per minute production if he does get on the floor.
And by the way, those minutes were not, that was kind of weird because Robert Williams Daniel Tice fouled out a minute and a half into the fourth quarter. Robert Williams only ended up playing 3 minutes in the fourth quarter there. Grant Williams finished that game out. So it's encouraging on one hand. On the other, you're like, well, he's not closing the game out, even if Tice gets into foul trouble. But most of those minutes actually came with just normal backup rotations in for Tice through the first 3 quarters. So.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen him get more than 17 or 18 minutes, basically, regardless of what happens with Tice. And then obviously the downside risk is there because we've seen Boston go small, whether it's giving more minutes to Grant Williams, whether it's giving more minutes to Brad Wanamaker, and you get like 8 minutes from Robert Williams. So he's still very, very risky. And I'm looking now, but I assume he's probably getting, right now we only have him at 11% ownership, which isn't bad. Definitely something to pay attention to there, because if his ownership comes up, like a lot of times you'll see ownership on a player like this come up because if you project them for like 16 minutes, their median projection is going to be right around 6x. And so because there's such little value on the slate, you'll see a lot of ownership go there. If that becomes the case, you can pivot to, like I said earlier, Kendrick Nunn, Kelly Olynyk. You understand the risk that those guys could play 8 minutes too, but Robert Williams has that same risk. There's not a huge difference in range of outcomes for Williams and those two guys. So if there starts to be a big ownership gap between them, I think you can make that pivot. Right now, you have Nunn at 7%, Williams at 11%, Olynyk at 11%. In that case, just play whoever you have projected best.
You want to talk game 2 here? Denver and LA Clippers?
I really need the Clippers to win this game.
Why? What do you got going on?
Just how much shit I've talked on Twitter about the Clippers being better than the Lakers.
I wasn't sure if you had them to win the series.
No, well, I had, prior to the shutdown, I had a couple $1,000 bet with Big T that the Clippers would go further than the Lakers, but we called that off when COVID happened.
This is the last day to use the Red Zone promo code. It's awesome. You've heard me say it. $750 for a week, 50% off the Awesemo Plus NFL Weekly Pass. You go to Wendy's, you get a number 1. What's it? Dave's Hot and Juicy. I think so. You ever do the 4 for $4 there? It's delicious, Adam.
I haven't been to Wendy's in a while. I do like Wendy's.
Spicy nuggets, a little honey mustard. Can't beat it. But you can beat it because you can't eat an Awesemo NFL Plus Weekly Pass, but you will be eating at Ruth Chris Steakhouse after you get it, and you won't have to go to Wendy's. You won't have to go to McDonald's. 50% off the week. Use the promo code REDZONE at checkout. All one word, REDZONE. It'll get you the ownership projections, the player projections, the top stack tool, which is supremely important in winning tournaments on DraftKings, on FanDuel, wherever. All of this stuff for $750 a week. It's 50% off the top. You can get the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well. All of these tools developed and used by Alex Baker, Alex Awesemo Baker, the #1 ranked DFS player in the world. These are his tools, not just his name slapped on them to make it look like they're good and then it's just crap like you see a lot of other sites do. That is not the case. These are the exact same tools that he uses, and that's why we've had so many people have such incredible success using them. So half off NFL Awesemo Plus weekly pass. That's 50% off. You get it for $7.50 using Red Zone at checkout. One word, REDZONE. And by the way, when you sign up, come hit us up. Check out the Slack chat, the premium Slack chat. It's pretty awesome. If you enjoy fantasy sports, DFS, sports betting, and just talking sports and shooting the shit all day long, there's no better place to be than premium Slack chat. You got guys and girls that love sports and love DFS as much as you do. So be sure to jump in there when you do to the premium Slack chat. Once again, Red Zone, one word, at checkout. Get 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus NFL Weekly. All right, Denver and the oh, and by the way, that Miami and Boston series is the first time in 51 years that a 1 or 2 seed in the Eastern Conference has not made the conference finals. So
you said in how long?
In 51 years.
Wow.
Yeah. The last time since they went to the 16-game playoffs or 16-team playoffs to happen was 1984. But I think that's when that started. So I think overall it's been 51 years. Pretty remarkable stuff. Anyway, Denver, LA Clippers. I can't believe the Clippers have allowed this to happen, first of all. They're laying 7.5 points. I've been wrong. I've been wrong here. I thought they would win game 5, and I thought they'd win game 6, Adam. Just full disclosure here. I did not think that they would lose this. Now, in game 1, I said, if you don't run this, I tweeted this, if you're not running the offense through Jokic, you have no chance. Michael Malone has made a concerted effort to run everything through Jokic, and we'll get to those numbers in just a moment. And it's been working. But the Clippers are the better team. They're being outcoached and they're being outplayed in the second half. Listen to this. Their offensive rating in the first half is 121.4. Their offensive rating in the second half, not just in this series, but throughout the entire postseason, is 109.7. I don't know if they're taking their foot off the gas. I don't know if they're just getting lazy, but they're seemingly unraveling in the second half. So I will throw this at you. Clippers minus 3.5 in the first half. Seems like something we should all be pretty excited about. But man, this should never have gone to a game 7, dude.
Yeah, I mean, you've
credit to Denver too, by the way. I should give them some credit.
Yeah, for sure. You've seen a lot of tweets and talk like all series about the Clippers kind of just acting like they have this in the bag and they just have to show up and they'll get their wins. Mm-hmm. And normally I just kind of ignore stuff like that as just, bullshit talking points that people need something to say, but it really does seem like they just think that by showing up at some point, they're going to get this fourth win.
If you've watched any of these games, you're right. The cliche platitudes are annoying, but yes, it looks like the Nuggets won it more in the second half. They won it more, and I just don't even like saying that, but it's true.
Yeah, it's just that I don't know, anyone that played like sports as a kid or high school sports, like you had those teams that, were the best, and basically no matter who they played, it was just like, oh yeah, we're on the field, we're going to win. And, you could get some wins against those guys just because you tried harder, basically. It's kind of how this series feels, as ridiculous as that is.
Yeah, there's no question. Let's start it off with Denver. Jokic since game 2 has a 33.3% usage rate. Jamal Murray's at 23.6. The LA Clippers have done one thing pretty well throughout this series. They have done a pretty solid job of limiting Jamal Murray. His point totals are 12, 27. That's the game they won. The Clippers just came out flat, looked awful throughout. 14, 18, 26, 21. So he's had a couple games, but nothing like what we saw against Utah, not even remotely close. Meanwhile, Nikola Jokic is averaging 1.44 DraftKings points per minute. He's been fantastic. 29.4% assist rate, 21% total rebound rate. So across the board, that's why I said I'd never want to compare Bam to someone like Jokic. These numbers, production, overall opportunity, and amount of possessions that he's controlling in this Denver offense has been incredible. And that's exactly what they need to do to stay competitive. Without Nikola Jokic taking control of the Denver Nuggets offense, they would never have gotten past game 5.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, just when you think about the makeup of the Clippers, basically.
Their one weakness.
Right. You had, in round 1, you had Murray taking over these games because Utah was basically just letting him get whatever he wanted in the pick and roll, just wide open shot after wide open shot. And they had Gobert out there making life at least somewhat difficult for Jokic. Now in this series, you have whatever combination of Paul George, Patrick Beverley, Kawhi, just chasing Jamal Murray around the floor and making life miserable for him, while you have, a relatively weak interior trying to defend Jokic. So it's, for lack of a better word, kind of a funnel spot here for Jokic, where obviously the Nuggets are more than happy to run the offense through him, but the Clippers basically dictate that as well by making life so difficult for Murray. So no reason to expect that to change here. I don't think it's just unlikely that the Clippers put Murray in a situation where he can even say like, oh, this is my game. Like I'm going to take this one over. It's just going to be really, really difficult for him to do that. And the path of least resistance is Jokic. So I don't see any reason not to think that Jokic keeps being the guy here and looks like a fantastic play.
I'm with you 100%. Boob in chat says, can we please talk about how an Awesemo mod said Middleton is a top 10 player in this league? That's Jordan Klein producing the show. My assumption is he's referring to that Bleacher Report list of top 100 that said Chris Middleton was a top 10 player.
Yeah, he was. That's how that whole conversation came up.
Yeah. Do you still think he's a top 10 player in the league, Adam?
Yes.
Do you really?
I don't know about top 10. I mean, like, he might be 10. Like, I don't have an actual list on the top of my head. I do think he is one of the best players in the league yet.
Okay. Would you still put Giannis in the top 10?
Yeah, no question. I thought you were going to say top 3. I was just like, yeah.
Where would you put Jokic? Or I'm sorry, where would you put Doncic at? I know they lost that series, but and I know it's only one series, but where would you put Doncic now? It's such a tough question, isn't it?
Yeah, those questions are always hard for me too, because it's like one through 3 or 1 through 4, basically, you have some order of like LeBron, Kawhi, Giannis, and Davis. Probably.
And they get interchangeable.
Yeah, and then it's just like, I don't know, like Tatum, Doncic. Like there's so many guys like in that, I don't know, 5 through 20 range that are like more or less the same. I would say Doncic is in there somewhere.
You've certainly triggered people. Look, I don't have Middleton in the top 10, but I'm definitely not putting, these people are saying Karis LeVert over Middleton. That is the silliest thing in the world.
No chance.
You can't. Go ahead.
People also just don't believe defense is a thing whatsoever. So there's that.
Yeah. Look, there's definitely recency bias regarding Middleton, though, and it's not good recency bias. He had that one solid game in Game 4. He pretty much single-handedly won him that and won me a lot of money. But outside of that, people are remembering some really bad games against Orlando, Adam. They're remembering some really bad games against Miami, and that's the way it is. But I'm a huge Karis LeVert fan. I'm also a believer that Kenny Atkinson did a ton to further along his maturation process, and that man deserves a job. But there's no way you can put Karis LeVert over Chris Middleton.
No, he's one of the most efficient players on high usage in the league, and he's an elite defender. Like Karis LeVert's not in the category.
Would you agree that he was wildly underwhelming in the postseason?
Yeah, without a doubt.
All right, so we're both on the same page that Nikola Jokic in this spot. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Denver gets smoked in this game, just throwing it out there. Like this might be a spot where the Clippers say, you know what, we've dicked around for way too long. We need to come out and blow their doors off. That is very possible. I'm not denying that, but you can't play it that way. And if it does stay close, the only way it's going to stay close is with another big Jokic game. He's getting like 32% ownership on DraftKings right now. I think that's pretty reasonable. On FanDuel, where, like I said, Adebayo, Daniel Tice, all of these guys are eligible at power forward. Nikola Jokic is getting 25% ownership. I want to actually, well, you know what? I'll ask you at the end of this, because then we can talk about some of the higher priced players on the Clippers. But let's run through this Denver squad first and hit on a few of the other guys that need to be discussed. Michael Porter Jr. actually 1.09 fantasy points per minute in this series. That's the second highest on the team. It's ahead of Jamal Murray. Less minutes, of course, though.
Yeah, the minutes are basically the problem you run into with Porter. Right now, he's projected for 18% ownership on DraftKings, which is really appealing. He's $5,300, which is obviously a really cheap price point. You just need him to get the minutes. 3 games ago, he got him like 33 minutes. Paul Millsap barely played. One thing that was notable in that game, though, was that Paul George was in foul trouble. And if you look at the rotations that Mike Malone has run throughout this series, you've seen a lot of Porter coming in when George goes out, because it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to have Porter on the floor when one of Kawhi or George are on the bench for defensive reasons. So that was the case 3 games ago. Then 2 games ago, you had Porter go back to playing, 20, 22 minutes, whatever it was, and Millsap played a bunch of minutes. Last game, Porter ended up at 26 minutes. He closed that game. On the 13th, Porter closed, played 26.8 minutes. Millsap played 21.2. Porter played the entire fourth quarter. My assumption, and for what it's worth, George and Kawhi both played their normal minutes in that one as well. So there was nothing like weird there for Porter. So my assumption is that you're getting around 26 minutes for Porter. That's how I'll project it. There is the risk that he doesn't get it. The probably the biggest risk would be if somehow Denver is actually winning this game in the fourth quarter. You probably don't see Porter as much. But assuming that they're down and they're trying to come back, Porter being on the floor would make a lot of sense. So if you give him around 26 minutes here, I think he is going to project as a good option at 5,300. If the ownership stays relatively low, which I do expect it to come up, but if it stays relatively low, then I think he looks like a guy that'll get to a lot.
So, Michael Porter, Jeremy Grant. Fewer players have busted as heavy as Jeremy Grant as chalk has in some of these spots, right? Like, I believe in game 4, where Jeremy Grant was 5,100, played 34 minutes and had 7 DraftKings points. He was very chalky. Then he follows it up in game 6 with 20 minutes with 9 fantasy points. All in all, he's been pretty popular, but you got to hand it to DraftKings. It's like, when Vegas sets a line, people think it's supposed to be wildly accurate, but really it's just they're trying to get equal action on both sides. Well, a little bit different in this case, but that price tag has reeled people in every single time. And I'm not saying anybody's wrong about it. The value has been scarce. It's been hard to come by. But do we finally jump off the Jeremy Graham bandwagon here? Oh, and by the way, he did have 3 fouls last game. He got in foul trouble in the first quarter, foul trouble in the second quarter. So that did curtail his playing time. But he did not play in the fourth quarter. He didn't play for the final 16 minutes of that game. Closing it out was Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Gary Harris, who's been playing a ton of minutes, Michael Porter Jr., and Torrey Craig. So we should probably be paying very close attention to that, knowing that they went down from a 19-point deficit early in the third to pulling away with this game and winning by a margin of 13.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption is that they're going to go back to the normal rotation and Grant's going to play his 35, 36 minutes. The problem is just that he's still expensive enough. It's really, really difficult for him to actually give you a score that you have to have at his salary. And it's very easy for him to give you one that sucks, especially when he's getting some ownership, because he's, and right now we have him as the 4th highest owned player on the slate. Like if that holds, then I doubt that it will. Like I assume Porter ends up being higher owned, but if that were to hold, there's just no way. I mean, he's like the perfect example of someone that is just going to be less productive typically in the playoffs, because you're getting more usage going to the better scorers, whether it's Jokic, Murray, Porter when he's out there. And Grant is basically out there for defensive reasons. Through the first 6 games of this series, he has a 13% usage rate, and he's averaged half of DraftKings point per minute. That's a lot lower than his season averages in both categories. And it's not like his salaries come down to like 4K or something. You still really need him to give you like 30 DraftKings points to be happy that you rostered him at this salary. And that's excluding the fact that he's getting ownership too. So it's just really difficult for me to get to Grant. He's just not someone that I'm particularly concerned that if I don't have him in my lineup, it sinks me. And you can get a leg up on the field by not having him in a lot of cases.
Jamal Murray getting a ton of ownership too. Are you buying into this? He's right now projected for the 5th most ownership on the slate.
He's been getting ownership, which has been weird to me. It hasn't made a lot of sense to me for the reasons we talked about before. I don't know if maybe sites are weighting his usage rate, his overall playoff usage rate more, and so it's driving it up, as a result of what he did against Utah. And obviously you saw the ceiling against Utah, but just an entirely different matchup and a lot lower probability for him to go off because of how the Clippers can defend him. And then you factor in that he's priced up because of what he was doing against against a completely different team. He's playing huge minutes, and there's that. You're getting 40 to 42 minutes from Jamal Murray. So that alone will make him a decent projection for his salary. But he's someone that I wouldn't really want to get to unless his ownership is like half of what it is right now.
I don't think you'd need to either. I already mentioned his per minute production, his usage, everything has been down. The Clippers have done a good job of curtailing his production. We got about 9 minutes to go here. I'll let you close out Denver, and then we'll wrap it up with the Clippers.
So if Paul Millsap obviously is basically the opposite of Porter Jr., like whatever minutes Porter Jr. is not playing, Millsap is playing basically. Again, my assumption is that Porter probably closes this game out. If he doesn't, Millsap probably is. So if Porter's ownership does skyrocket, Millsap's the natural leverage play there. You have to keep in mind too, though, that they're not like 1-to-1. It's not like Millsap produces at the same rate as Porter. So it's not quite as easy as just putting Millsap in instead of Porter and saying like, oh, hopefully Millsap gets more minutes because he's just not the same DFS player. But he would be the guy that you're using to pivot or to leverage against Porter if you go that route. Gary Harris at 4,600 is someone that I'll be paying attention to ownership on. Not a high usage guy, but should play a bunch of minutes. He's coming off 42 minutes last game. At 4,600, that's a pretty, that's a lot of opportunity at least. And he's only getting about 18% ownership. Like if Harris is going to stay around 20% and Grant's going to come in at 40%, I'd rather roster Harris.
Okay. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the NBA strategy show here at Awesemo.com. $350,000 baller this week, $35K to first. I told you guys leading up to the season, be ready for it. Start learning this site, learn the format, familiarize yourself with it because they're going to blow it up for NFL season. And that's exactly what they've done. $355,000. They have CSV edits, CSV uploads now. Also some smaller contests with limited entries, so you're not going up against 150. They even have some management free contests. I'm looking at it now. PJ 3K guaranteed, no management fee, basically no rake, where everything you pay in as the player gets paid right back out to the player. Here's another one and another one. There's a ton of no management free contests, $5,000 NFL guaranteed one. So just a much better chance of winning here. Sign up, check it out. Use the promo code Awesemo when you do to get a little something back in return. AWESEMO. It's Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Check them out. Some really big contests happening across the board, especially for NFL this week. All right, Adam. Game 7, LA Clippers, 7.5 point favorites. I don't see how they blow this, but I've been wrong in Game 5 and Game 6. I've been wrong about this team for most of this series. So I'll sit back and see what you have to say. And then we'll turn it over to the MLB strategy show coming up. You've got, who do we have? I think we got Terry and we got Jake. Jake was up top of that showdown yesterday. I thought he had a shot to win it, and then late game surge knocked him down. But I was pulling for him. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the Clippers, I think, look like probably the most appealing team, just as far as number of players that look really good here. Paul George, the first one that really stands out, still only 8,600 on DraftKings. Obviously there's been talk about him not really showing up in the playoffs, and he has been somewhat disappointing. But I think it's really overblown too from a DFS standpoint, because you're still getting 39, 40 minutes from Paul George, and he's averaging 1.14 DraftKings points per minute in this series, even with your concerns over how poorly he's played, not you, but people in general. For comparison, he's basically averaging the same points per minute as Bam Adebayo at about the same price point, but most likely playing several minutes more. So George still looks like a great option to me. Kawhi's obviously been fantastic, most expensive player on the slate, but if you can get to him, you're going to be happy about it. Averaging 1.38 DraftKings points per minute in this series and playing huge minutes as well. But then you also get some solid value here with Zubats at only 4,800. He's obviously a risk for foul trouble, but if he can avoid that, you're seeing him close games. You're seeing that Doc Rivers wants him out there against Jokic as much as he can. And so getting to around 30 minutes is definitely doable for Zubac if he can stay out of foul trouble. And that's a really cheap price point for that. Lou Williams has not been great this series. Minutes have been, he played 24 last game. Some games he's getting up around 27, 28, but only a 23% usage rate. You are seeing him struggle a little bit because of how many minutes Kawhi and George are playing. It's just, less usage to go around for Williams, but still obviously capable of getting hot in any one particular game. And then Pat Beverly, probably the best value as far as really cheap guys. Only played 17 minutes last game, dealt with fouls, but prior to that, he played 27 minutes. So that was really good to see, since we've seen Beverly be limited for the entire series up until, I guess it was game 5. Getting him up to 27 minutes, he's averaged 0.75 DraftKings points per minute in this series. He's not the most exciting player, but he does contribute in pretty much every category. He'll give you some defensive stats. He's 4K on DraftKings on the slate with very little value. So he should be one of the highest owned players on the slate yet again tonight.
So your top options from across this game, starting with the Clippers?
George, and then like factoring in salary, I would say George, Zubac, Beverly, Kawhi, and then you're just taking shots at guys like Lou Will and Marcus Morris.
Do you think Beverly gets additional run in this game? He did foul out last game, as we mentioned. He fouled out early in that fourth quarter. It's likely that you might have seen him play through the fourth quarter if he had he not fouled out. 27 minutes game in the game before that. They need his defense. Like, how many minutes are you giving him today?
I'll go about 26. I mean, we saw the 27 in game 5. He fouled out with 10 minutes and 15 seconds to go in the fourth of game 6. If you give him those 10 minutes, he's at like 27 and a half minutes again. It seems like that's what they're trying to do. It's just a matter of can he not get in foul trouble.
All right. Zubac and Beverly right now, Adam. Yeah. Number 1 and number 2 in projected ownership. So
yeah, and I think that's how it should be. I mean, they both look like really, really good values. And obviously there's not a ton of value on the slate. They're risky because both of those guys very easily can get in foul trouble and lose minutes, but it's not like there's a ton of great options to turn to. And if the game goes according to script, they're both getting so many minutes at their respective price points that they just look like great values.
All right. Hey, hit us up on Twitter if you haven't done so yet, at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. You can listen to me bitch about Vic Fangio for 5 hours and Adam Scherer. You can just listen to him bitch at everybody. Actually, no, you don't bitch, but you just, you like to keep things interesting, and I appreciate that. At Ship My Money DFS. Let's give our winners for these games. Boston -2 against Miami. Who you got?
Miami.
Yeah, you got Miami. So would you just take them outright in this one to win it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just that because they're better rested coming into this game.
Yeah, I am with you on this one. I think this matchup is as even as it gets, though. I really do. It's tough. So I guess, if you're on the fence, you take that spot. I don't feel comfortable here. I think this goes either way. Clippers, Denver, Clippers laying 7.5. I know Denver has come on super strong, forced to game 7. I'm actually going to take the Clippers to cover this, but like I said, I've been wrong about this Clippers team throughout the majority of this series. Adam, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm with you on the Clips.
Yeah, and if you want, like I said, Clippers -3.5. You might get a -3 in some spots in the first half. You can check that out on OddsShopper as well. Awesemo or oddshopper.awesemo.com. You can search everything across all of these books. It's fantastic. It's totally free, and I would love for you to check it out because put a ton of work into that. We really did. And I think you're going to love it. I used it a ton for football, been using it for basketball, and you should enjoy it as well. So I'll do that. Give me -3.5 first half, and we'll see how it plays out. Adam, will close with this and turn it over to MLB Strategy Show. Your top 3 players from this slate right now as it stands.
I mean, in terms of value, I have to go with Zubac and Beverly, and then I would throw Paul George in there. Also, just in terms of real players, really like Jokic, really like Kemba.
All right. Hey, get us above 100 likes before we head out of here. We got 357 watching, 95 likes. That's not too hard to do. A little bit goes a long way. We love you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow. You've been watching the NBA Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.